So what happened back during the time of this Pelagian controversy with Augustine? You see, Augustine had previously written in favor of free will. And I'm having to distinguish that because a Calvinist will say, oh, we believe in free will. You're free to sin. Calvinists don't actually believe in total depravity. When you start talking to them and I say, well, I know people who do not profess Christ and they do good things. They got married, they had kids, they're a doctor, they invented devices that save children's lives. They, saved kids from burning buildings. They pay their mortgage, they pay their taxes. They make decisions all the time. They make decisions to vote, they make decisions to buy things, to, make major, getting married, buying houses, buying cars. Um, they earn money honestly. I know some atheists that adopt kids and out of drug homes where these kids can now have an opportunity to grow up in a safe, loving environment. So you're going to tell me that? So they'll say, no, you're talking about absolute depravity. That man is definitely as bad as he possibly could be. And this is another word game because Calvinism is just word games. If you go to the dictionary or thesaurus and you look up absolute, you will get total as one of the substitute words. If you look up total, you will get absolute. Total depravity, absolute depravity. If you don't recognize that those are basically the same thing, you're playing word games. So total depravity or total inability is the idea that no, man's not as bad as he possibly could be. In other words, he does some good things or some not horrible things, but he's just totally depraved. No, I don't think you mean he's totally depraved. When you really boil it down, you got people who are not professing Christians who actually go to church or who are trying to find their way, who give to the poor. They do all kinds of things, and when you really boil it all down, there's actually only one thing they can't do. Total depravity that sounds total and all-encompassing actually just means you can't believe the gospel. That's it. That's the only real thing they believe a person cannot do. Can't believe the gospel, you cannot receive Jesus Christ. So while they call it total depravity and they present it as if it's this all-encompassing thing, at the end of the day, when you talk to them, they have to admit there's actually only one thing. So what they really believe is singular depravity. They don't believe total depravity. So somehow there is a special category. They can make all these other choices, but there's a special category of choice or belief or receiving, which they do in every other category of life just fine. But there's a special category that a person can't do because they're totally depraved. Actually, they're singularly depraved. But there is no scripture for this special category of inability. This one singular special category of this one choice you can't make, one thing you can't believe, one thing you can't receive. This category does not exist in scripture. There is no barrier there, okay? They just really believe in singular depravity. So they will say, even if you look at the London Baptist Confession, they have a section on free will there. That's why on Wilson's book talks about free will and non-free free will. It's hilarious because Calvinists believe in what is actually non-free free will, and they call that free will. And then the non-Calvinists are supposed to modify it with libertarian free will, which is the dumbest semantic word game I've ever heard in my life. It's ceding the language to people, making words less and less valuable. It's like devaluing your money. Okay, letting Calvinists participate in the information ecology is like intentionally devaluing your money. It's like quantitative easing. Okay, it's intentionally devaluing your money in a way that doesn't help anyone and makes communicating much more difficult. Okay. But that's what you do when you're trying to exercise sophistry, when you're trying to deceive people, get one over, when you're strategically misrepresenting arguments. It's another fallacy that they do. Strategically misrepresenting their own position and other people's positions. Now, something's bad. Your position is bad when you have to strategically misrepresent it. And then when other people accurately misrepresent it, you say that they don't understand Calvinism. So Pelagius comes along. Pelagius starts with an unscriptural presupposition. Let me draw on this here. Let me use a pen and circle this. an unscriptural presupposition, and that is a presumption of the human will. That's the axiomatic starting point, a presumption of the human will. So that's, I've used a battery here to depict it because there's a positive and a negative side. And so all the argument throughout all of history is about one end or the other end of this battery. The problem is it's the wrong battery. You see, that's the problem. It's the wrong thing. It's the wrong thing to argue about. They're arguing about the negative and positive poles of something that is wrong to start with. So Pelagius comes along and has a presumption of the human will. Okay? And then Augustine comes along, and his answer to that is not to get rid of the battery entirely and go back to Scripture. His answer to this is to take the premise. He takes the Pelagian premise of starting with a presumption of the human will, except the only difference is he takes the other end of the battery. So Pelagius and Augustine are holding on to two opposite ends of the exact same battery. It's the same system. It's the same thing. And Augustine's whole system, his whole system is Pelagian because he accepts the Pelagian premise of starting with an axiomatic presumption of the human will. I do not claim to be an expert with Pelagius, but I do understand from some scholarship that's come out recently that Pelagius has been very much misrepresented by Calvinists. I mean, imagine a Calvinist strategically misrepresenting somebody who disagrees with him. I'm not an expert on the contents, but I do understand that he's been misrepresented. But I'm not going to try to get in this video. I'm not going to try to get into the details of what that misrepresentation is. For the sake of this argument, we can even just say that the lying Calvinists were right about Pelagius, and that's fine, whatever, for the sake of this discussion. Even though the way to tell if a Calvinist is lying is if their mouth is moving, except for when they're not talking about their distinctives, because the mean complex is a parasite that has to have a host, and sometimes they say things that align correctly with the host, Christianity, but when they are talking about their distinctives, that's when you know they're lying. So Augustine, all of Calvinism is based on a Pelagian premise. All of it is. That we should start with an axiomatic presumption of the human will. That's the Pelagian premise. Doesn't matter that it's negative or positive. Taking the negative or the positive side of this doesn't matter when the battery is the wrong thing to be dealing with anyway. You see? So Pelagius is like, I'm taking the positive side of this wrong thing as my starting place. And Augustine's like, well, I'm taking the negative side of this wrong thing as my starting place. He's following the Pelagian premise. So Calvinism is just a negation of Pelagianism. It is not scriptural.